Hi, I'm Ruta from the International Youth Debate Alumni Association in Lithuania, and today I'm going to present to you the Jugend debattiert debate. But first of all, we have to ask ourselves the question, why is debating important? We believe that every democracy needs citizens who can ask critical questions and are not afraid to express their views. Debating teaches to listen to the opinions of others and to respond to them in a matter-of-fact and fair way. Debating also prepares a person to defend his or her opinions in a well-rounded and convincing manner. Last but not least, debating teaches political awareness by offering an opportunity to discuss relevant socio-political questions from a critical perspective. Now, I'd like to explain the rules of this debate. The debate involves 4 participants and 4 positions: pro 1, pro 2, contra 1, and contra 2. The pro positions are in support of the debate motion, whereas the contra positions are against the motion. Participants are assigned their respective positions only 30 minutes prior to the debate. Their speaking order is pro 1, contra 1, pro 2, contra 2. The debate starts with the opening round, in which every participant has 2 minutes to briefly outline his or her position. After that, the discussion begins. In the discussion, participants can exchange arguments without any strict regulations. In the final round, participants have 1 minute each to reflect on the arguments made and summarize their position in light of the debate. There is also a timekeeper. A timekeeper makes sure that participants do not speak longer than they're allowed to. He uses a bell and gives signals. The signals are the following. Speaking time is over in 15 seconds. Speaking time is now over. Speaking time is exceeded. Today, our debate question is, should Lithuania legalize cannabis for recreational use? So, come and join me for this debate. Debates concerning the legalization of cannabis in Lithuania receive considerable amount of attention from scholars, politicians, and activists, and therefore should be included into the Lithuanian political agenda. However, in Lithuania, cannabis is demonized and put in the same category alongside very dangerous drugs such as opioids. Such perceptions render public discussions unproductive and slow down progress. The pro side would now like to propose the defining terms for this debate. By cannabis, we understand a drug that is produced by the cannabis plant and contains a chemical substance THC, which has strong psychoactive effects, most notably a distinctive feeling of relaxation and calmness that is described in the popular culture as the feeling of being high. In this debate, we would like to focus on the legalization of products containing THC for recreational use. Legalization is the process of authenticating or certifying an activity in a legal document so that a country's legal system will recognize it as having full legal effect. The term recreational use of drugs is the use of psychoactive substances to induce an altered state of consciousness. The pro side proposes that the use of cannabis for recreational purposes in private and designated areas in Lithuania should be legalized by the Parliament of the Republic of Lithuania in 2022. The legalization and accreditation processes should be overseen by the Ministry of Health and State Food and Veterinary Service. Consumption of cannabis should be allowed to all citizens who are at least 18 years old. Any kind of advertisement of cannabis should not be allowed. Legalization of cannabis for recreational use would be a positive development for Lithuania because it would minimize the risks associated with the black market and ensure quality standards for the products. Therefore, the pro side speaks in favor of legalizing recreational cannabis in Lithuania.
Legalization of drugs for recreational purposes has become a common cliché among demands raised by liberal political powers. Existing restrictions are even considered to be violations of personal freedom. What is being forgotten, though, is that those restrictions are mainly designed to prevent the potential consumers from unknowingly harming themselves. The proposed legalization, therefore, might be more harmful to the potential consumers rather than beneficial. First of all, a lot of administrative resources are needed to define and describe the processes of production and supervision. Those resources could be used by the government to tackle the current health crisis. And therefore, I would like to ask you, should the Ministry of Health really prioritize this complicated task over the next 2 years? Secondly, recreational use is a rather abstract term. It doesn't really clarify neither the purpose nor the amounts that could be consumed or sold. We need red lines to distinct recreational use from abuse, product, and poison. It is essential for preventing the consumers from unknowingly harming their health. We therefore ask how the proposed legislation will ensure the recreational and safe use. Inability to clearly define the process and the aims of the drug use makes the proposal more similar to an ideological strive for freedom and deregulation rather than an effective mechanism regulating the cannabinoid market and protecting the rights of the consumers. Therefore, the Contra side opposes that the use of cannabinoids for recreational purposes in designated and private spaces in Lithuania should be legalized by the Parliament of the Republic of Lithuania in 2022.
Tomai, you state that restrictions are mainly designed to protect and create a safe environment for the consumers so they could exercise their freedom of choice without a fear of unknowingly harming themselves. I tend to disagree here, simply because restrictions do not necessarily provide protection from harm. It can actually have quite the reverse effect, where potential harm to current consumers is even increased. Today's policies regarding usage of cannabis in Lithuania is a perfect example for this. A simple act of curiosity of smoking a joint could completely ruin one's life, with an individual can be sentenced up to 2 years in jail, together with prisoners who have committed much more serious crimes. This implies that current policies in the place have little to do with protection. It's mostly forcing fear onto the country's citizens while limiting their personal freedom. You have mentioned that given the current situation, the government is lacking resources to implement such change in 2-year time. But we can look at Canada's example. The legislation to legalize cannabis for recreational use was passed by the House of Commons in November 2017. And then in March 2018, it was already approved. So I think 2 years is enough time considering that Lithuania is a much smaller country. For current consumers which are buying products from the black market, there is a high risk of obtaining poisonous substances with unwanted chemical addition. This risk could be easily mitigated by regulation. Additionally, money which is circulating in the black market could be collected to the state's budget and used to introduce drug prevention programs and provide easily accessible addiction treatments. All this is achievable without limiting personal freedom of choice. Therefore, we think that the use of cannabis for recreational purposes in Lithuania should be legalized.
Antanas, you said that today's policies in Lithuania, which punish cannabis consumers with criminal liability by imprisoning them for up to 2 years, do more harm for their lives than the usage of cannabis itself. And I actually would like to agree with you. However, we think that legalization of marijuana does not solve this issue. Both decriminalization policy and the consumption of marijuana pose a considerable threat to consumers' physical and psychological health. Therefore, we believe that decriminalization of cannabis would be a much better solution. This has already been done by a number of EU countries such as Estonia, Czech Republic, or Austria. You have also mentioned that legalization of cannabis would diminish the black market and the money taken from it would be used to introduce drug prevention programs and to provide more accessible addiction treatment. Yet, by simply legalizing cannabis, you cannot eradicate the black market, as drug cartels would undercut the prices offered by the state licensed sellers. For example, the US state of Colorado saw a sharp increase in marijuana-related charges, which occurred within the year when marijuana was legalized. It is obvious that after legalization, the black market was actually thriving. Also, I want to stress that you have not reacted to our question how the proposed legislation ensures a safe recreational use of cannabis-contained products. Now, I would like to come back to the topic of health. Consumption of products containing cannabis leads to various physical and psychological issues. Smoking marijuana can damage lung tissues and cause respiratory problems. According to Harvard Health Publishing, there is also a higher risk of heart attacks and strokes in the hours immediately after consuming cannabis. When it comes to mental health, cannabis usage may increase the risk of developing such illnesses as schizophrenia, depression, and other psychiatric disorders. For those reasons, legalizing marijuana is opposed by the major public health institutions in the United States. Therefore, we are against the proposal that Lithuania should legalize cannabis in 2022.
So, Tomai, you raised the question about how to ensure safe use of recreational cannabis. Well, as with tobacco and alcohol, information such as the potency of the product or what potential side effects it may cause could be provided on the packaging of the product. The Lithuanian State Food and Veterinary Service would establish requirements for quality and quantity of THC in the product and ensure conformity to the existing legislation by cooperating with respective authorities and the law enforcement. And I would also like to address Jokubas' statement that decriminalization would be a better solution to achieve our goals. According to the experts from World Health Organization, consuming alcohol has a bigger impact on criminality, it causes more damage to the socio-economic environment, and is more harmful to the consumer than cannabinoids. However, alcohol consumption is not prohibited in Lithuania.
Ruta, marijuana is a gateway drug, especially when consumed by young and vulnerable people. And this is, in my opinion, the main reason why alcohol is legal and marijuana is not. Now, I'd like to come back to our previous argument. Cannabis leads to various psychological and physical health issues. For example, THC directly affects the short-term memory. Active ingredients in the drug alter the processing of the information through the hippocampus. The use of marijuana at a very young age has severe implications on the developing brain, which is why teens must avoid marijuana. The obstruction in memory development can cause significant cognitive impairments later.
Tomai, I agree that consumption of cannabis influences our health and life experience. In addition to that, consumption of cannabis is not life-threatening. According to the toxicologist Robertas Badaras, it is almost impossible to overdose on marijuana. Because of that, the pro side believes in giving people a right to act responsibly without constant regulation from the authorities.
Antanai, the contra side also believes that the individuals should be responsible for their own actions, but often people are simply not qualified enough to determine the impact of cannabis consumption on their health. For example, in 2012, Colorado legalized cannabis and kickstarted a multi-billion-dollar industry with every product imaginable: brownies, gummy bears, granola bars, and so on. But to say that they have legalized cannabis is a mistake. They have actually commercialized THC. Before 1970, cannabis contained less than 0.5% of THC. Over the last 40 years, percentage of THC slowly but steadily rose. Fertilizers and pesticides are heavily used in production of cannabis, and they made the growth cycles extremely short and unnatural. The products that are being sold today in Colorado can contain up to 30% of THC, and concentrates can contain above 95%. These amounts are considerably higher compared to the natural plant. Such an industry is trying to convince us that we're consuming something natural while fixing social ills when we actually are not doing that.
So, to your argument, Jokubas, I would just like to say that, of course, the new legislation would establish red lines for cannabis consumption. Taking as an example the Canadian legislation, it would introduce strict regulations such as requirements for producers who grow and manufacture cannabis, as well as industry-wide rules that define standardized serving sizes and the potency of the product, prohibitions on the use of certain ingredients, good production practices, tracking requirements of cannabis for seed to sale to keep it out of the illegal market.
Ruta, this is of course very good to hear. However, it is very important to understand that all these regulations, as mentioned before, require a huge amount of administrative resources and legal work from the governmental institutions. We must not forget that the current pandemic situation requires all possible attention and flexibility of the institutions, which might be compromised by complicated legislative procedures. The recreational aspect of the proposal makes it hardly adequate to prioritize it over the current health crisis.
Tome, I would like to come back to your argument that
In this debate, we have assessed the topic of legalization of recreational cannabis in Lithuania. The pro and contra positions debated health, legal, and economic aspects. All positions agreed that consumption of cannabis has both benefits and disadvantages, and therefore the legislation should be reasonable and comprehensive. The pro side believes that people can be trusted to act responsibly with full knowledge of the harm caused by the product, and thus the government should not interfere with their decisions. The pro side thinks that in the future, debates should be held about society's negative perceptions towards recreational cannabis, because it is a no less important step in integrating this topic into our society. Therefore, I am in support of legalizing cannabis for recreational use in Lithuania.
Legalization of cannabis is undoubtedly an important question, the proof of which is our today's debate. Despite the fact that both sides agree on the importance of precise and balanced legislation and the need for the government to strictly regulate the production and consumption, there are substantial differences in our approach. The contra side believes that the potential risks outweigh the benefits. The Lithuanian government is currently not in a position to carry out extensive research and ensure an adequate regulation of the cannabis market. Instead of focusing on legalization, why don't we just pay more attention to the current exaggerated punishing policy? For this and other reasons, I am against the proposal that Lithuania should legalize marijuana for recreational use in 2022.
in the debate, we have agreed that there is a need for a change in the current policies. The contra side started that decriminalization should be considered instead of legalization, and that marijuana can be easily misused for lucrative purposes. But we believe that this can be easily solved by implementing strict regulation policies as Canada did in a year. We have also agreed that protection of current consumers is very important, but not that decriminalization could provide it. Poisonous products with chemical additions obtained from black market can only be diminished through legalization, and by utilizing economic gain from taxed products, we can ensure not only safer consumption, but also provide better education on drug prevention, better addiction treatment, and personal freedom of choice. Therefore, I support legalization of cannabis in Lithuania.
As my colleagues have already mentioned, in this debate we have agreed that the current Lithuanian policies on cannabis consumption are too strict and thereby need to be changed. However, the contra side has not supported the pro side's proposal to legalize cannabis for recreational use. Opposing it, we think that decriminalization would be a much better solution. As we have seen, cannabis leads to various physical and psychological health issues, and its citizens' health should be the #1 priority for the country. Legalization would also mean introducing strict regulations and requirements for products which contain THC. This would require vast administrative resources and legal work, which would be a heavy burden for the state government in regards to the current health crisis. Therefore, I am against legalization of cannabis in Lithuania for recreational use.
So this is what the Jugend debattiert debate looks like. I hope that you enjoyed this video and now are inspired to go debate your issue.